Hey everybody, it's the Nitty Professor. I'm here with Paris the cat and this book by Sofi Thanhauser called Worn, which several of you I've seen talk about on various podcasts. I probably first heard about this on the Jillian Eve podcast, and I appreciate knowing about this book, so I bought it and I read it. Actually, I read it on my trip to Toronto. So a lot of us are skeptical or maybe even downright pessimistic about our ability to make a dent in industrial clothing and all the environmental ramifications of that by knitting and spinning and crocheting, etc. All of the slow fashion efforts that we are investing ourselves in. So I was very excited to read this because it gives me hope. And that's why I wanted to share my thoughts. And I'll probably do this in more than one video. Obviously, it says right on the front that it's a deep and sustained inquiry, and I can confirm that. Sofi Thanhauser, I'm assuming that's how she pronounces it, did yeoman's work here in not only investigating a ton of research. I mean, the bibliography in this book, I'll just tell you here, how many pages long is it? All the scholars that she consulted. So if I look at where A begins, it's on page 325, and then we get to Z, and we're on 353. So that's a 28-page bibliography. Just crazy. And it took her a long time to write this. So I'm not going to pretend to do justice to this whole book. So obviously I'm advertising, free advertising, Sofi. We should all read it. It's very informative. However, although the first, let me just look at this. The most, let's call it 4/5 of the book deals with the basic downfall of the entire clothing and spinning and weaving industry. She has a chapter on linen, cotton, silk, synthetics, and you're like, geez, this is not good. Then you get to the chapter on wool, and things kind of look up. So I really liked reading that, and I thought I would give you my thoughts on this chapter 12. It's called The Army of the Small. So just orient you here. So again, this is the book, Worn, A People's History of Clothing, Sofi Thanhauser, and the let me just give you the data here, and I'll put a link to it. It was published by Vintage Books in 2023, so quite recent, although, you know, she started her research on this about 10 years ago. And it's about a 300-page book. And yeah, table of contents, so you see the fabrics that she is covering, and then before the conclusion, well, actually part of the wool section is the conclusion. So I'm going to kind of intersperse some of my own thoughts and experiences with, I just kind of took some notes and have a few artifacts out here. But the overall thrust of what I want to convey is that us doing this is a reason to be hopeful that we can change the world. I'm just gonna be bold and claim that. You could disagree. I'm sure plenty of people will disagree. And, you know, it's easy to get despondent that we're stuck in this capitalist profit maximizing mechanism that is global now and has reduced us to looking forward to an era of potentially irreversible climate change. But I've seen a lot of evidence that we can make positive change. We can reverse enough to actually make, I'm going to call it a useful difference. So I'm just going to kind of go through some thoughts. She starts out in Wyoming. That's where the chapter begins. And she gives us a lot of really good information. Basics about like wool, why wool is a good fabric. She makes a point. She starts off in the coal territory and makes a point about how the clothing industry relies not only on, you know, petrochemicals to actually make the thread and the fabric, but also to provide the energy to run the factories to make the thread that makes the fabric. And that's why she was kind of looking at coal, But historically, Wyoming was a huge sheep producer, and she offers some statistics. In 1900, for example, Wyoming had 5 million sheep. By 1950, it had 17.5 million sheep. Now, as early as 1984, it had less than 1 million sheep. So that's a very troubling trajectory. Now, when she's in this coal mining area, I believe it's winter or maybe early spring, and she can't figure out why the workers are not wearing wool, because they're wearing some synthetic protective clothing that's sort of mandated, and the point was hinted at that it's flammable, and they're working in a flammable type of environment. Why wouldn't you wear wool? And when I read that, I was thinking to myself, so one of my favorite, little bit of a tangent here, my favorite German novels is a rather obscure novel. The author, for those of you who are from Germany, and I know I have a lot of viewers from Germany, which I love, his name is Bertolt Auerbach, and he wrote in the 19th century, and he wrote a novel about a self-maximizing capitalist actor, which is a great sort of, what could I call it? It's like this pithy, consolidated account of the tragic trajectory of a man who uses sheep production as a means of enriching himself, and he tries to do it through insurance fraud. And so this is an edition of that novel. It's that the translation is The Story of Diethelm von Buchenberg, Die Geschichte von Diethelm, des Diethelm von Buchenberg. So Diethelm von Buchenberg is the name of this capitalist actor who just goes nuts with raising sheep for wool, and he stores all this wool. And the ironic part is that he sets it on fire and everything burns down so that he can recoup and go to the insurance to say, oh, I had this huge loss, so y'all got to pay up. And of course they challenge him, and at the end he ends up in jail. But I'm like, in a way, I think it would be hard to set all that wool on fire because that's one of the properties of wool that's so magical, is that it's very hard to burn. And so sometimes I wonder, was Auerbach aware of this? I'm not sure. I don't know. You tell me if you know how possible it would be to burn down a warehouse full of wool. I would be curious, because now I'm thinking that the whole premise of this novel is a little shaky. So wool is not very flammable, folks. That's an advantage. It's not very flammable, and it also is, very insulating. So that was one of the points that Thanhauser was making when she was in Wyoming, was now people in Wyoming, workers who should arguably be wearing wool, aren't wearing wool. They're wearing synthetic, because we've all been convinced that, synthetic is the way to go. Acrylic was the downfall of wool. That's a big point that she makes. So you had these, DuPont was advertising all these cool synthetic fibers as the answer to everyone's unknown prayer. It's probably not even prayer anyone had, but they were good. It's like breakfast cereal, right? We're told we should eat this cool breakfast cereal that we've infused with all these vitamins because, of course, it's way better than, raw oats and eggs. Same thing with synthetics. So artificial foods, good for you. Baby formula, way better than breast milk. Oh my gosh, why would you want to use that? Why would you want to wear wool when you can wear acrylic, right? She makes the point that the last big boom for wool in Wyoming was World War II. A lot of uniforms were made of wool at that point in time. And sadly, I think I heard this point made on Jillian Eve too, the whole herding industry of sheep, the sheep that are around today, it's sort of common for migrant workers to be shepherds, and they are exploited. They have very low pay. They have no security. And Thanhauser claims that, which I think it'd be interesting to, pursue this, is to what degree is this true? She akins it to human trafficking, these Peruvian sheep herders or shepherds who are employed specifically in Wyoming. However, that being said, growing wool is good for the environment, and she goes into that in the next chapter. I think I'm going to sort of save the next chapter for like a part 2 video on this whole topic to go into why growing sheep is good for the environment, but suffice it to say that it is. So she explores the whole small-scale producer movement, and she explains that it began in the 70s, and she interviews people at the Finger Lakes Woolen Mill in Genoa, New York. I find that intriguing because I remember going to the Finger Lakes when I was a kid. I used to live in Buffalo. And part of this whole movement revolves around the reclaiming of older machines. I actually have a friend who bought an older carder from someone in Wisconsin. So she, Thanhauser, is kind of positing part of the advantage of this small-scale production as lying in the reuse of older machines. And she goes into some detail about how the mechanically inclined owner of this Finger Lakes Woolen Mill, his name is, I want to call his last name Ardai because I know it's Hungarian. It's Ardai. Maybe it's Ardai. I don't know. In any case, he used his mechanical skills, I think he was an engineer, to not only repair the carding machine, but also to alter it, to make it do things that maybe it wasn't necessarily supposed to do, or, you know, had stopped doing. And I think that I really like this idea of, it goes into crafting, right, of using your agency, the whole repair movement, being able to take a machine that you own and not only repair it, but also even adapt it to your purposes. And it's just a much more satisfying way of interacting with machines and making them do things that are productive and that enhance our agency, instead of abusing people by tying them to machines and forcing them with low pay and lack of benefits to do repetitive tasks and be chained to a machine, 14 hours a day, which is what's going on. She, goes into a lot of that in other chapters, earlier chapters in the book. She talks about how these small mills that are going around, and some of you have told me about small mills that you know about, like in Montana, which I want to go to. They do a lot of custom work, so that enhances people's agency too. When you say, well, I have this fleece and I need it to be prepped in this particular way, I need these processes done, but not necessarily those other processes, and here's like the result that I would like. And then the person that you're hiring to do that work can use their own brain power to decide how they're going to go about the task, the timeline that they want to follow, what they want to charge, and you can negotiate and work together. And it's just a much healthier economic environment than, you're sort of stuck going to a big box store and the selection is all fossil fuel produced petrol synthetics that were put together by disenfranchised workers in a foreign country that's thousands of miles away, that you could never ask how you doing, or do something kind to them. They you have no idea what circumstances that they're in, and they're probably not very good. So she goes into hand spinning as an example of what she calls the army of the small, and uses some adjectives like how passionate hand spinners have been to develop this craft, that they put their whole persons into it and they develop communities. And she stresses how these communities extend to online communities, which I have found a really great source of getting to know new people and making connections. It's like taking the internet and using it for good, I like feeling that and knowing that I can actually take a technology that has a lot of downsides, but actually take advantage of it for good. And she seems to agree, Thanhauser seems to agree, that by building connections via the internet, to enhance our craft work as an army of the small, we're actually doing something good. And she talks about the growth of a whole industry surrounding spinning. She talks about schools, programs, suppliers, spinning wheel makers, as well as publications. And I have a couple of little show and tell examples here. Like, here's a book that I bought, Learn How to Spin with Ann Field. This book is from, let me see when this, it looks like it's probably 15 years old or so. Yeah, 2011. Publisher is Trafalgar Square. It says Spinning Basics. And as you can tell, I've got my bookmark in there. I've definitely used this book. Here's another book that I need to dig into, Spinning Designer Yarns by Diane Varney. And I've got a number of books. And I think it's really cool to recognize that just by virtue of people wanting to cultivate this ancient craft on their own terms, that then there are like these side industries that have developed in concert with that, which include spinning wheel builders and like drop spinning supplies, and obviously all of the fiber too, that whole industry. And then so the author Thanhauser adds, in addition to spinning, the crafts of, weaving, crocheting, knitting, dyeing, felting, all of these things. It's like this whole body of ancient crafts that people have been cultivating in a way that, again, enhances their own agency, gives them choices of how they want to go about making things, the speed at which they want to go about making things, how they want those things to turn out, adding their individual imprint, working in community. It's just this whole, it's like a healing, healthy community of crafting. And she also mentions how this was an overt rebellion against the growing knowledge of sweatshop creation of, so the industrialization of fiber and textiles and clothing, which I think is great, Emphasis on slow production, slow fashion. I always like to use the slow fashion hashtag when I make videos, because I think it's really critical to tie into that and to advertise that the slowness itself of making is a positive attribute. She mentions at one point in this chapter the preservation of critical sheep, and then again she's going to go into that in the next chapter, which I think I'm just going to talk about down the line, so I don't get too verbose here. But that in itself is a whole other question of the positive role that sheep can play in combating climate change through industrial clothing production. And there are a couple of quotes that I thought would be useful to sort of emphasize here moving towards the end. One of them is, there were ways industrial machinery could be used other than to generate huge pyramidal structures of power and wealth. That's a quote from page 237 in the book. And I think that is well worth stressing. It's not necessarily that machinery is in and of itself bad, that the internet is in and of itself bad, that even like AI is in and of itself bad. These are obviously dangerous technologies, and the room to use them for self-maximization, for example, to pursue greed, is huge. And that has to be combated. Obviously, it's really crucial to develop thought processes, ethics, frameworks, theories to combat the possibility, the probability, that technology can be used for, shall we say, nefarious purposes. What it boils down to, based on Thanhauser's writing in this chapter, is adjusting the scale of industry to a small human scale. And that's where she uses this metaphor, the idea of an army that is rebelling and fighting, but it's an army of the small. That we are doing the work of resisting in an effective way that actually capitalizes, to use a pun, shall we say, on the small scale. It's precisely this small scale that is the desirable element of crafting. So I'm going to close here with a quote from the book that is one of the sources of hope that I found in Thanhauser's book, Worn, which if you can find it in the library, borrow it from a friend. If you can afford to buy it, that would be great. I really think it's worth reading. So here we go. This is on page 249, close to the bottom. Mammoth structural forces built the modern clothing system. A willingness to violently exploit the Earth's natural resources, devalue women's labor, and build neocolonial trade regimes on old colonial foundations. These Goliaths are not only being stared down by scholars, activists, and politicians, they are also directly confronted by individual people insisting on simply doing something they really enjoy. This is the army of the small. So, on that note, I just wanted to kind of address this, question. It's a question, right? Can we make a difference? Can we make a difference? And I agree with this writer. Yes, we can. And the way we can do it is by doing this. Y'all take care. Bye.